After days of deadly destruction in the Bahamas, Hurricane Durian is creeping up the East Coast, bringing 100-mile-an-hour winds and flooding rain through parts of Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. But one place Durian is not expected to hit: Alabama. That is, unless you ask Donald Trump, who's been doubling and actually tripling down on false claims he's been making since Sunday morning that Alabama was in the path of the storm.
They get a little piece of a great place. It's called Alabama, and Alabama could even be in for at least some very strong winds.
The National Weather Service quickly refuted what Trump had to say, saying the state will not see any impact. So, of course, the president dug in and brought out this map in the Oval Office yesterday, featuring a hand-drawn extension of the storm's possible path on a projection map from Thursday. So White House reporter raised the obvious concern.
And that map that you showed us today looked like it almost had like a Sharpie.
I don't know.
Well, I think I do. It looks like the president had a federal weather map altered, which is technically illegal, by the way, instead of just admitting that he might have made a mistake. Just the latest example of Trump's troubling relationship with reality, leading to yet more questions about his mental stability, including instances of paranoia.
False stories, all made up. Lies. And they take these lies and they put them on front pages. This is a rigged system.
And his delusions of grandeur.
I am the chosen one.
And an apparent lack of ability to empathize, of making things all about him, even when speaking from a hospital just days after a mass shooting.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had what was the name of the arena? That place was packed.
So is it time to worry? And should mental health professionals be weighing in at all? Joining me are Fergus Cullen. Fergus is the former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party from 2007 to 2008. Fergus, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Dr. Leonard Glass is an associate professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, senior attending psychiatrist at McLean Hospital, and a contributor to the book The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. Doctor, it's good to see you, too. Recently, you wrote, Trump's emotional impairments, as a quote, are a cause for national concern. What are his emotional impairments?
Well, as you have outlined, he can't deal with the truth, and he can't distinguish the truth from what he would want it to be. And whether he has convinced himself or whether he knows that he's lying and is just able to get away with it, either way, it's impairing his ability to sort matters out and come up with reasonable and appropriate solutions to bigger matters than whether it's going to affect Alabama or not, but whether we should make decisions about war or peace based on his aggrieved ego.
You also said in the same piece it fits the criteria used by forensic psychiatrists to identify dangerous individuals. What does dangerous mean in that context?
Dangerous means people who yield to vengeful impulses, who have a sense of aggrievement, of entitlement, a lack of empathy, cruelty, a kind of impulse to attack, and access to means of attack. And unfortunately, he has access to the biggest arsenal on the planet.
When your colleagues read what you write, other than the whole debate about whether or not, we'll get to in a minute, possibly, about whether psychiatrists should be, quote, diagnosing, commenting on, whatever the verbs are, on a public figure who they haven't personally seen. We'll talk the so-called Goldwater rule. Do they agree with you or take issue with you on the merits of what you have to say?
I think there's widespread agreement that the president is impaired and that his impairment is increasingly interfering with the performance of his job.
You're nodding. Were you just nodding in agreement? I know you're not a shrink, so I understand.
Sure,
nor do you play one. But
so what kind of impairment, I think, is an open question.
What does that
mean? Debate that.
You
know, I spend a lot of time with an elderly man who suffers from dementia, and he says things like, "I've never had pizza before," when, he has had pizza many times. It's like every experience is new. And I was reminded of that when I saw the president the other day talking about a Category 5 storm, saying, "I didn't know we had a 5. I'd never seen this before."
On that note, why don't we play what the president had to say? This is courtesy of Seth Meyers. Here he is.
They've never seen a category like this coming because it came in really at a 5. It was a Category 5. I never even knew a Category 5 existed. This has been a Category 5, which few people have ever even heard of. A Category 5. Nobody's ever heard of a 5 hitting land. Category 5 hurricane. Category 5.
Never heard about Category 5s before.
So what was your takeaway from that, Fergus? So those, not that.
You know, if this was a family dinner, this is Thanksgiving, and, you know, an elderly member of the family is talking like this on the couch, you'd be having private conversations about, boy, should we be taking away his keys? Should we be taking away his checkbook and his finances? And yet this is President of the United States.
So let me quote a Republican I quote more than I would ever think, George Conway, the husband of you-know-who, Chief Aide Kellyanne Conway to the President of the United States. This is a tweet from late August. Republicans need to face up to the fact that the President of the United States is mentally unstable and psychologically unfit, and it's only going to get worse. Why aren't they facing up to the fact, or at least according to Conway and I guess you and Dr. Glass, that the President is mentally unstable?
Well, if you're an elected official who's holding office right now, you look at what happened to Jeff Flake, and you're a Republican. You look at what happened to Jeff Flake or to Mark Sanford and say, look, the number one rule of the game is stay in the game. There's no benefit to me to taking on this president who has 80% approval ratings among my fellow Republicans. So you're seeing profiles in cowardice right there.
Do you know, there have been many presidents, you know this much better than I, who have suffered from some form of mental illness. I mean, the most notable, obviously, is Abraham Lincoln, arguably the greatest president, who suffered from depression. Does the president suffer from mental illness, or is it something else that you're suggesting?
It isn't mental illness
what
that
is
we're
it?
suggesting. It's impairment. And Fergus made a wonderful point. I would take it one step further. I'd take away the keys to the car. I'd take away his gun. And that's where we are all at risk when our impaired president is unconstrained.
Well, you know, it's funny, not funny, you both are mentioning taking away the keys. Chuck Todd from Meet the Press was on with us today, and we're discussing this on the radio, discussing this very issue about the mental stability of the President of the United States. And here's what Chuck had to say.
Look, Jim Fallows has written this. I think he wrote, there isn't a single job in America that Donald Trump would be allowed to stay in based on his behavior. Not certainly as a CEO of a real company.
And yet there's one job he is allowed to stay in, unless the vice president, this is language from the 25th Amendment, this provision has never been invoked, and a majority of, on and on and on, file a written declaration the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. You both believe that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, do you?
I think that the quote from Chuck Todd, or whoever he's quoting, is accurate. I mean, if this was a school principal, if this was head of a company, the board of directors would say, how do we ease this person out and do it soon before they do any real damage?
Is the criterion met from the 25th Amendment met by your standard?
It is in my mind, and the issue is fitness, Jim, not mental illness. If you look at the criteria for serving in the military, for being an officer, the field manual, it specifies qualities that the president is obviously lacking, along with being able to run any kind of an enterprise.
I don't want to get lost in the weeds, but since I mentioned it before, and probably a lot of people at home are thinking about the so-called Goldwater Rule, the American Psychiatric Association rule, which states unethical for a psychiatrist to give a professional opinion about public figures whom they've not examined in person, on and on like that. You've had great issue with it. You resigned over it, I think, a couple of years ago. Are you violating? You are violating this rule, yes?
Well, technically, I'm not violating it because I'm no longer a member of the American Psychiatric.
Had you been?
Had I been, I would have been in ethical hot water.
Do you think your colleagues are in ethical hot water because they're not violating the rule? You have written, your position is you have a public responsibility. I've read, you said this a couple of years ago here.
Yeah.
So are they not in an ethical conundrum by virtue of their silence?
Well, I think it's dubious whether they're meeting their public responsibility, but if they don't define themselves as having a responsibility to the society at large and only a responsibility to the people they treat, then if they look at it narrowly, then they can feel okay about what they're doing.
You know, we talked to Art Kaplan, a medical ethicist from NYU, every week on a radio show, and he is a big advocate, I guess any sane person is, that any president should be medically and psychologically tested as a candidate, and then maybe annually or something like that. Is that the way to deal with this, so there isn't this anxiety over, should this be the first time ever to look at the 25th Amendment? Should we have regular exams of sitting presidents?
You know, it's tempting. I think it's unlikely. And I'm not sure that this president, I mean, he passed the most ridiculously elementary mental fitness test, but I'm not sure that his particular type of problem would become illuminated by a psychiatric exam.
You know, before we leave, we're going to end where I started. We talked about this remarkable situation where members of the Conservative Party, Boris Johnson's Conservative Party, in Parliament stood up to him, including his own brother, resigning from Parliament. Can you see a day when your fellow Republicans decide that they have a greater responsibility to their country than they do to either their party or their own career? And I assume some of them believe what you two are saying. Can you see that moment coming?
Yeah, absolutely. The day after it's all over, they're all going to say, "I was with you all the way." Oh, you know, in the meantime, they're asking us to ignore what is obvious to us. This is the emperor has no clothes come to life. Everyone's pretending that they don't see what is before us every day.
Good to see you both. Doctor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Fergus, I'm so impressed and pleased to hear this from a sitting Republican.
Fergus,
Thanks,
it's great
Doctor.
to see you. I
Thanks,
won't
Jim.
take an opinion on it. Thanks.